Hi guys, welcome from the Ed Break. So we are still talking about comparing interests and also comparing growth. The last thing that we spoke about was some random growth. Now we're gonna explore random growth in great detail. We specifically gonna use foreign exchange just to see exactly what are these trends and models that I spoke about before we went to our Ed Break. And we'll be using the strength between a rand and a US dollar. And we'll be looking at exactly what does it mean to have a random increase or a random decrease or a fluctuation or an exchange rate that is different from that one and that one. So that's what we're really going to be looking at. But quickly, let's just recap what we've been doing so far. So remember, our big idea is growth. And then also we're looking at patterns with growth. We're looking at also graphs. We're looking at equations, which are the models that we use to predict the future together with the graphs. And also our context is between society and finance. Specifically now, we're going to look at some finance. All right, so our context in this particular lesson will be in finance, which is the exchange rate, because this is what actually assists us in looking at what it means to have a random growth, a decrease, an increase, a fluctuation, and all of that. Remember, foreign exchange will be an international trade that is not done in local currency, right? In local currency, it would mean that here we're talking about things like ZAR, which is what we are having locally. But this trade is mostly done in US dollars, right? US dollars, because this is like your most common used currency in almost all the states. So this is what makes it easier for us to be able to buy things maybe in the US when we are here in South Africa, or to buy things in maybe England when we are here in South Africa. So that's the most common trade that is being used. And then also, the cost of buying $1 will give you a clear indication of how strong currency is. Now, one typical example here is when you are watching the news. You know, just before we get to our weather forecast, they normally talk about the exchange rate and talk about what the cost of $1 is as compared to a rand, what £1 is as compared to the rand or to the dollar as well. So those are the things that we are talking about. So this actually tells you whether our currency is strong or is weak. But now let's actually understand what exactly does it mean. It means that the more you pay, the weaker the currency. Now, in the past months or so, we've been dealing with things like COVID-19. So what that has done is it has weakened our currency. Hence, we're actually buying $1 with 17 rands. It has actually gone to that particular price. So that was quite a big increase in terms of our exchange rate. But you can see that everything is then a fluctuation, because it was first maybe 16 rand, 17 rands, then it will go to like 14, 15 rands. So it will be fluctuating and not staying at the same amount every year or every month for that matter. So that's what actually tells us. So the more money you pay, the weaker the rand is, or the weaker the currency of that state is when you compare the two states. Now, what does the 20-year trend tell you about the strength of the rand, right? Remember, I said I'm going to use rand and the US dollar to try and look at the trend. Now, we're going to talk about whether our trend is linear or exponential. But let's look at an actual graph of this. On the graph, you can see that if you start here by 2005 and go to roughly 2008, it looks like it's a linear trend, right? I can even draw a line there and it shows me a linear trend. But if you look at between maybe 2009 and 2017, you can see it's more like an exponential trend there. And then you look at between 2017 and 2020, you look at it, it also becomes something like an exponential trend there, which is not a linear trend. Although this is the case, it actually shows us that At one point, we can have it as a linear. At one point, we can have it as an exponential. At one point, we can even have it as a parabolic, which is the last point there on this particular graph. So this is what actually tells us the issue of the exchange rate and what exactly does it mean when you're comparing a dollar and a South African rand. But remember that this was a 20-year trend. Now let's just narrow it down and maybe look at 10-year trend, right? Now with the 10-year trend, the graph will look something like this. Now you can see, I can now see a clearer trend in terms of what is happening with the foreign exchange. It looks a bit more linear now, a bit flat, and also even here it looks a bit parabolic, but not that much parabolic. So it's a bit closer to also being linear. So meaning, if I look at a shorter year trend of the foreign exchange between a dollar and a South African rand, I can actually get a closer look as to what is happening in the foreign exchange. But let's also narrow it down again. Now, if we take it now further to being smaller than 10 and we take 5 years, this trend will then look a bit flatter now. So here, it does not show much fluctuation or so, but it looks like it's a bit of a flat trend where there's not too much fluctuation, there is not too much decrease or too much increase. And that's what we are talking about. If we summarize this, it actually then means that let's also go back and look at if it's a 6 month trend, right? With a 6 month trend, now it looks like this is a decrease. And if it's a decrease, you can see that it means that we are now buying the cost of $1 in terms of rand is a bit decreasing. So remember what I said when we're talking about the more you pay, it means the currency is weaker. But now, the less you are paying, it means our currency is a bit stronger. So that's what the foreign exchange is. Now, what this is, when we look at different time periods, you can then get a better overall picture of random growth. But this random growth normally repeats in cycles. So you saw that with a 20-year trend, there was more like a linear trend, and then it became a exponential trend, and then it became a parabolic trend. So you can see that it is quite repeating itself with cycles that we are dealing with. And the cycles will be if there is an impact of a certain disease that we maybe need to deal with at that particular time, or it has to do with maybe elections and all of those. So those are all the factors that will be contributing to all of this that is happening in the foreign exchange. And if we take a closer look at different time frames, we can then see that, okay, the trend is a bit better to actually look at maybe from this particular perspective, which is 6 months, as compared to maybe 20 years. Because with 20 years, it's a broader picture, which does not really show us a clearer trend of what we are trying to look at. And then when we look at this, what you also need to see when it comes to a trend is, if your trend goes something maybe like this, which I think you've seen these graphs, normally in the news and all of that, this would mean that we are actually paying more money to actually get $1, right, in rands. What does that mean? It means that our currency would be actually very weak at that time, because for the currency to be strong, it means we must take out very minimal amount of money to then buy shares. So this will also talk about, those people that are investing in stock exchange and all of that. There will be a time where they are pulling away from stock exchange and saying, no, I can't invest anymore. And there will be a time where everyone is just saying, hey, it's Christmas, let's all just buy shares. Why? Because you'll find that the currency is a bit weaker, stronger at that time, meaning I am buying the exchange rate of $1 at a very minimal amount. But if I'm buying it at a very high amount, people will not be exchanging their currencies and all of that. So that's what we are actually talking about. So this is a clear indication of what random growth means. There's a fluctuation, it's not linear, it's not exponential, it's not also constant. So meaning what? it changes over time. With time, there's a change in the growth that we're looking at. And a very big example of this will be the exchange rate. That's it from me right now, guys. Let's go to a quick ad break and we'll be back with some more. Stay tuned.